Hi there, today I'm going to show you how to host Python code in a platform called Replit so that you can install self-service flow steps in your Marketo instance. And what I want to save you from is the headache I faced when I first came to this GitHub repository that's offered in the Marketo documentation, and I didn't even know where to begin. I had a vague idea that I needed to host code outside of Marketo that's able to catch information from Marketo, process it, and then send it back. But when I looked at this repository, I had no idea where to begin. Luckily, my buddy ChatGPT and the O3 model was able to help me out. I pasted in the URL to this GitHub and I asked it to take a look. And then I said, hey, ChatGPT, I want to be able to write some Python code and host it in Replit that will enable me to set up a self-service flow step in my Marketo instance. So this took me a lot of time, a lot of back and forth with ChatGPT and a lot of testing in my Marketo instance. So I want to save you guys from all of that hassle that I went through and make it as easy as possible for you to get started. And I'm going to give you a Replit repository that you can clone. And then once you clone the repo and you add your own secret API keys, then there are 3 self-service flow steps that should be able to work right off the bat. I'll walk you through cloning that repository and what changes you need to make to get started, but I'll do that later in the blog post. So that's the overview. The main reason you might be interested in self-service flow steps, I'm guessing you already know a little bit about them since you're looking at this blog post and you know some of the advantages. I'll go through at a high level what some of the advantages are later on, but the main ones are that there's no 30-second timeout limit, and they can send leads in up to batches of 1,000, which makes it a lot easier to process leads in bulk. So that's the advantage of using a self-service flow step over a webhook. And if you're not even familiar with webhooks in Marketo, then that's probably a good place to start by kind of learning how they work before coming to these more advanced self-service flow steps. But the main idea is it's a powerful way for you to interact with third-party applications and build custom workflows that you wouldn't be able to achieve in Marketo alone. And the main premise, as I mentioned before, or I didn't mention this yet, is that you send information outside of Marketo. There's a server listening for that information. It processes it and then sends that information back to Marketo. So that's how a webhook works, and that's also how self-service flow steps work in essence. And don't be intimidated by the word server. It's just somewhere that we're hosting our self-service Python code so that it's constantly listening out for information from Marketo. It's ready to process it and then send it back. And when we host code in this way, we're going to call it a service. And as I mentioned, I've seen a lot of documentation and posts about what self-service flow steps look like in Marketo, but I haven't yet seen someone kind of show you under the hood at what the code actually looks like to service that self-service flow step. So that's why I'm here. I'm going to show you under the hood at what the Python code looks like in the Replit template, show you how to clone it, and show you how to get started. Okay, so I'm going to link to the video here in the blog post, so that's where you can find it. And then this is the Replit template that I'm going to walk you guys through how to clone. And you can preview all the code in the template here. So I'm going to walk you through how to clone this, and then I'll walk through the code that's in this repository to give you an idea of what each part of the code does, so that if you ever need to modify it or create your own self-service flow step, that you'll know where to go. And then I'll show you how easy it is to deploy your code in Replit and install the self-service flow steps in Marketo and also test them out. This will be, as you've probably already guessed, quite a technical blog post. So if you're unfamiliar with APIs and you're also new to Python programming, then I recommend you check out the Demystify the API crash course, and you also pre-register for the Python for DevOps crash course that I'll be creating later this year. I believe that with ChatGPT and patience, anyone can become a Python programmer. So that's the premise for my course here. So if you're interested in learning more, then sign up and I'll notify you when it launches, hopefully sometime later this year. As I mentioned at the start, there are a number of advantages of self-service flow steps over webhooks, and the purpose of my blog isn't to tell you why they're much better than webhooks. I'm kind of walking you through the technical implementation and showing you how to host code to service those self-service flow steps. But Josh Arrington wrote a really good blog post that shows you all the advantages, and he goes into more detail, and he gives helpful images to help explain all the advantages of self-service flow steps. So check out that blog by Josh. He did a really great job there. But I just summarized them here at a high level. As I mentioned at the start of the video, the main advantages are you can process up to 1,000 leads at once with a single self-service flow step call. And you're not limited to the 30-second timeout, which limits webhooks. So take a look at all these advantages if you need convincing that self-service flow steps are the way to go. The only trade-off to all these advantages of self-service flow steps is that it's a lot harder to set up than simply setting up a webhook. Okay, so as I kind of hinted to, we're going to be using Replit as our platform to host our code. I haven't really done a lot of research on all the options available to host Python code, but Replit was being used by my company, Telnex, so it's the one I'm most familiar with, and it's really easy for, let's say, like a non-hardcore software engineer to use. It's very easy to deploy your code. It's very easy to set up secrets. So I really like it, and hopefully I'll give you a taste of how easy it is to use when I show you later on how to clone the repo and deploy it. And in order to deploy your code, it's the Replit Core package, which costs $20 per month. And it also allows you to make your repository private so people don't see the code in there. And to give you an idea of cost, I was running 2 self-service flow steps for about 2 weeks for my Marketo instance, and it cost me less than $1 to run. So it's $20, and then any additional usage you have will be billed on top of this $20 every month. And obviously, depending on how much volume you're running through self-service flow steps, this amount will change, but I just want to give you a ballpark figure that it is quite cheap to run computation on Replit servers. And as I mentioned at the start, I linked to the GitHub repo here, but it was very intimidating, and the README isn't great at telling you, okay, what does the service look like, or what does the Python code look like that's meant to interact with Marketo. So that's where ChatGPT came in. And after a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, I built the Replit template that I'm going to show you guys later. And they do give information about it here. And I just found it difficult to look at it in this format on the GitHub page. So I copied all the information to this doc here and added hierarchy so that it's kind of easier to go through and navigate and make a bit more sense. So if you want to use that, feel free to just, follow that link and look at it there instead. And then these are the 3 self-service flow steps that are contained in this Replit template. We've got one for calculating formulas, we've got one for doing a GPT completion or a GPT chat, and one for sending an SMS with the Telnex SMS API. So all you need to do once you install the Replit repo and you've deployed it to production to get this working is you need to get your OpenAI API key, and you can get that by following this link once you're logged into your OpenAI account. And if you're interested in looking more into the documentation about the request that's being made in this Python code, so if you want to understand more about what this code is doing to make that request to OpenAI, you can check out this documentation here. The send SMS self-service flow step requires a little bit more work to get started because you need to follow this documentation to sign up for a free Telnex account, buy an SMS capable phone number, create a messaging profile, and then associate that phone number with the messaging profile. Then you need to get your API key. Once you're logged into your account, you follow this link to show you how to get your API key. And then the code is already configured to send an SMS. But if you're curious and learn more about the Telnex SMS API, then you can look at the Python code for that here, because that's the exact same code that is being used in the repository here to send the SMS. And for these two, as I mentioned, once you have your API keys, it's very simple to add them to the secrets in Replit. And I'll show you how to do that later on. And then the last one is a self-service flow step to just compute simple Excel formulas. And it uses this library. This is imported into our Python code. And if you want to know all the Excel functions that this Python code can compute, then you can kind of click on any of these to see what the function does. And I'll just show you what that code looks like quickly. It's very simple, formula functions. It's just these simple lines here. If you want to know all the formulas you can use in the self-service flow step configuration here, you'd look at this page to get an idea of all the different functions available. Okay, I'll talk about all the known bugs with self-service flow steps at the end of this video. I won't go into them here, but Josh Arrington and I, we've been making a note of them here, and Josh also has a wish list of stuff he'd like to see. So if you're seeing any issues, or you think there are issues with the self-service flow steps and you think it might be something wrong with the Replit code, I check this doc first because it might be an issue with self-service flow steps overall and not specific to Replit. Okay, so now we're looking at the Replit template structure, and to show you what this looks like, I'm first going to clone the repository just so it's easier for me to navigate and show you around the Replit repo. So hold on a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to go click this remix template here. I'm going to call this Marketo self-service flow step test. Using the account I have now with my company, we have a core account, so I'm able to make this private. But if you have a free account, you'll only be able to make it public, and you won't actually be able to deploy your code. You need to have a Replit core account in order to deploy your code, so I recommend getting one of those. So we're going to use this template, we're going to clone it, and then I'm going to exit out of that window, show all my code here. And then these are all the services I have. Okay. Okay, so looking at the repository, I'll zoom in a bit here so it's easier for you guys to see and move my face. We've got a main.py here, and the main.py, its job is basically just to act as a router. So we'll have like 3 different self-service flow steps in Marketo. And then when each of those sends information to this Replit service, its job is to route it to the correct place. So if the SMS one is called, let's route that to the Routes.py in the SMS folder. If the like the calculate formula self-service flow step is calling this service, then let's route it to the calculate formula self-service flow step. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, so we're using the blueprint kind of function or library to do this, and we're registering it here. So from services, let's say GPT completion. So from services, GPT completion dot routes, which is this file here, we're importing blueprint as GPT blueprint. So don't get worried about the specifics here, but all that does is whenever we get the GPT completion self-service flow step sending information to this service, it goes to the main.py file, and then it's going to route that to the /GPT completion endpoint, and the GPT, it's going to route it to the /GPT completion endpoint, and then to the submitAsyncAction. So that's where it's actually going to route it whenever it comes in. And that's where, whoops, So that's what this is basically doing. The main.py routes it here to the GPT completion, and then that's going to go to GPT completion / submit async to carry out all the processing we want the self-service flow step to do. So that's all the main.py does. There's a Google Sheets functions here, which is used for logging the self-service flow step information, both the input information and the output information to a Google Sheet. This inbound footing is, it contains the credentials necessary to give the authentication to the Google Sheets API. I won't go through how to set this up in this video because it's going to be long enough as is going through self-service flow steps. I do plan on having a blog in the future about this, but if you're eager to learn now, just ask ChatGPT. That's how I found out how to go to the Google Admin Console and do the configuration necessary to enable the Google Sheets API and then to get this file. So if you're eager and you don't want to wait for my blog post, you can ask AI. Any AI bot should be able to give it to you. This is the workflow. I've got a logo here. This is the logo that's being referenced in this service icon endpoint and this brand icon endpoint. And this is what you actually see when you're in the admin section. So this is the service icon and the brand icon that you'll see. And the service icon also gets shown when you're in the flow step configuration of a smart campaign. So you'll see the service icon there as well. And then you'll see that we've got a services folder which contains every self-service flow step that we want to enable or create. So I've got 3 folders here for each of the 3 steps I mentioned to you earlier on. And within each of these, we've got the Routes.py. And this contains all the logic, basically, that we want the self-service flow step to carry out, and that's mostly contained in the submitAsync endpoint definition down here. And at a high level, it contains all the endpoints and what each endpoint should do, so that Marketo knows how to interact with all these endpoints. So this is what the Routes.py does. And then the swagger.json, the best way to describe that is that it lists all the endpoints that are available on your service, the data type, the data and the data types expected by each endpoint, and the shape of what your service will send back to Marketo. And this allows Marketo to know how to talk to the service. So it's got an idea of how to talk to the service from the swagger.json, and then it's going to send information to all of these endpoints, and then Routes.py defines how your service responds when Marketo calls all of these endpoints. Okay, and before diving into all of these endpoints, and like all of them are pretty simple, like the brand icon, service icon, the status endpoints are pretty simple. The meat and potatoes will be in the submitAsync one and the getServiceDefintion one, which I'll run through later. But before doing that, I just wanted to give you an idea of what Marketo sends to, so let's scroll down here. I want to give you an idea of what Marketo sends to your service. So I mentioned before, Marketo can send up to 1,000 leads in a single batch, but this example I show you here is just for a single lead sent in a batch, but there could be 1,000 leads in this object data here. So the things to notice, this token, API callback key, and the callback URL, this is used by the submitAsync function so that it's going to send all the process information back to Marketo to this URL, and it's going to specify this key and this token so Marketo knows it's got the permission to send information back via that URL. And then this is what is going to update the lead in Marketo. Then we've got this object data, and as I mentioned, this can contain up to 1,000 leads. In here, for each lead, we're going to have, it's going to say the type, which is lead. We're going to have the object context, which is going to contain all the fields we send in the self-service flow step. So in this case, it's email. We send the SMS subscription field, which is true. And then this ID is always present in the object context. And then we also send the flow step context. And this is the information that's configured in the flow of the Smart campaign when you're filling it out. So that's all this information here. This is what gets sent in the flow step context. And if you want to get an idea of what it looks like, I'm going to close some of these tabs. If you want to get an idea of what it looks like when more than one lead is sent from Marketo in a single batch, you can take a look at these sheets here. I've got example payloads and example responses for each of the 3 self-service flow steps in the template. So if we go to send SMS batches here and we open up this first one and drag it down, go OK, we can see that we've got 3 different lead informations sent here. We've got the first lead here, we got the second lead here, and we got the third lead information here. And then the script for this single batch then creates a row for each lead in here. And then it contains the response from the Telnex SMS API to send this message to this phone number. And then this is for a single batch. This is when a single lead is sent in a single batch. And then we've got a single row for that here. And it's the exact same premise with these sheets. We've got one, this is a really long one. We've got a batch sent for 3, a batch sent for 1. Then got all the rows for all the leads. So this is for the first batch of 3, all in green, and then this is for the single batch. And then the exact same for the calculate formula. So you can take a look at these to get an idea of what the payload looks like when there's a single lead sent or there's multiple leads sent. And then you can get an idea of what each of the self-service flow steps does. And in the SMS one, you'll notice there's no callback object here specified. That's because the SMS self-service flow step doesn't update anything on the lead. It just sends an SMS message. Whereas the GPT completion and the calculate formula leads, their job is to update a field on the lead. So since they're updating a field on the lead, I've included the callback object here so we know what the service is sending back to Marketo. So you can take a look at these sheets to get an idea of what Marketo is sending and what we're going to send back. Okay, so let's dive into the Replit repository now, and I'll show you what a typical Routes.py looks like. So the service icon and the brand icon, they're very simple endpoint definitions. Basically, we just return this logo that I mentioned to you earlier on. Whenever Marketo queries this endpoint, we just return this file. So this is the service icon and the brand icon that we're going to see here in admin and also in the flow of the Smart campaign. Then let's get all the easy ones out the way first. The status one is just pinged by Marketo every 24 hours just to make sure your service is still alive and functioning. And the main job of this endpoint is just to return OK, making Marketo know that, yep, it's still alive. The install, so we'll use this one later on in the video when we're installing our self-service flow steps. And when we go to this endpoint, it directs Marketo, or when Marketo queries this endpoint, it directs Marketo to the swagger.json file here. So Marketo knows how to interact with this service. So those are all the easy ones. Another easy one I'm going to tell you about is, this one is optional, to get picklist endpoint. If you have any fields in your self-service flow steps in the configuration that need a drop down, I'll show you this later on. So for the calculate formula, this response data type is a drop down field and it's got values of int, bool, string, and float. And since we've got that drop down, we need to get a picklist endpoint. Basically, all this does is it listens for Marketo for the name of the field. It gets the name of the field from Marketo for which we want to get the drop down values for. And then it's going to return all the choices for a field name. So in this example, when Marketo is looking for the drop-down values for the data type, it's going to send that in here. We're going to know the field we're looking for is data type, and then we're going to return all these choices to Marketo. If we had more fields, that require drop-downs, we just define those down here. It'd be if field name equals ChatGPT model, be another one, or yeah, basically, I can't think of more examples here, but if you had more fields in this configuration and they also needed drop-downs, you'd put those field names as different choices in here as well. So you'd have if field name equals field name 2, return these choices. If field name equals field name 3, return these choices, and so on. So those are all the easy endpoint definitions out of the way. And as I mentioned, the meat and potatoes is in this submit async action. Let me zoom in some more. So in all three of these Routes.py for these self-service flow steps, the submit async action is structured similarly. So the data equals request.getJSON is we're getting all the information that Marketo sent us. And then, as I mentioned before, Marketo can send up to 1,000 leads in a single batch. So that's why we have a for loop here to get the object data. We're basically going to get all the information for all the leads in the batch and loop through them one by one lead at a time. And then we're going to get the fields we need from either the, what did I show it as? We're going to get the fields we need from either the flow step context or the object context. So we're going to extract those here. So we're going to get the flow step context stored in this variable, and then we're going to get the object context and stored in this variable. And then we're going to get the, in this case, we're going to get the formula, the data type, and the field from the flow step context. And then the only thing we're getting from the object context is the lead ID. And then this is where we do the custom logic of the function. So in this case, we're just calling formula functions to pass it the formula that we want computed and to return the formula in a particular data type, or to return the answer in a particular data type of either int, float, string, or bool. You'll notice that the structure is very similar for all three of these repositories. So in this case, we're just calling the OpenAI function to create the chat and get the answer we want. And then in the SMS one, we're calling the telnext functions to actually send the SMS. So I showed you this before, just a very simple function to send the SMS to the phone number. And then this is the code we're using here to create the ChatGPT chat and get the answer we're looking for. So the structure is very similar for all three of them. And in each case, we have to build a callback object. So this is what's necessary to update this lead in Marketo. And there's two things that are present in the callback object. The first is the lead data. So this will always contain the lead ID, so Marketo knows which lead to update. And then it contains the field that we want Marketo to update. So let's see, in this case, yeah. Yep, so in this case, this is the field we're updating, and we're pulling this field in dynamically from Marketo. I'll go through this more later on, but in these self-service flow steps, it's this response field that we're pulling in here, and also here. We're pulling these in dynamically, so that's what we're using here. That's the field we want to update with the answer from ChatGPT. So there's always the lead data part of the callback object. And then there's the activity data part. And the activity data, this is everything you're going to see in the activity detail when you click into the self-service flow step within a person's activity log. These are all the values you're going to see. And for every field you define here, they must be present. I'll go through this again later on, don't worry. They must be present in the callback payload definition attributes if you want them to appear. So they must be defined here in order for them to show up in the activity log when you define it here in the activity data. Okay, we've got some error handling here, just in case there's any errors. Which function are we in here? Just in case there's any errors interacting with the OpenAI API, we've just got some error handling here. That's what the try except does. But basically, once we've gotten this callback object for this single lead, we're going to append it to the list of callback objects. So we're going to, as I mentioned, we're going to iterate through every lead, call ChatGPT in this case. And then once we have the information back, we're going to add the callback object for this lead to our list of callback objects. And then similarly, we're going to take all the input information for this lead and all this output information for the lead and log it or add it to our rows leads. This is what we're going to update in Google Sheets to make something like this. So then once we've done everything for this single lead, and we've added the callback object for this lead to the list, and we've added all the logging information for this lead to the logging list, that's one iteration of the for loop done. And then we're going to repeat the same process for all the other leads in the batch. And then once we're out of the for loop and we've looped through all the leads, we're going to make one single callback request to Marketo. And in this callback request, as I showed before, we're going to specify the callback URL that Marketo sent us. That's where we're going to be sending all this information. And then we specify the callback key and the token that Marketo gave us. The Munchkin ID here doesn't matter. They don't actually look for it, so that's why I just put in a dummy value. And then the object data, we're going to send back the list of callback objects. So the callback object for every lead we went through in the for loop is going to be in here. And we're going to send it to Marketo in one single call. We get the response from Marketo once we send it, that callback information. And we store it in what I call batch row. So we store that callback response here. And then there's just an extra function here called split long text, because sometimes Marketo, as we'll see here, sometimes Marketo can send a lot of information, and Google Sheets has a 50,000 character cell limit. So if Marketo sends us like 1,000 leads in here, that can easily, especially with this amount of information, that can easily exceed the cell limit. So if we want this to log to Google Sheets correctly, I've just got a function that will break very long requests into batches less than 50,000 characters, and then just overflow them in this sheet. So it'll take this and then spread it across all these different cells, so each one is less than 50,000 characters, because it won't log to Google Sheets otherwise. So that's all this split long text function does. It makes sure that the request we sent, if it's over 50,000 characters, it's going to overflow it into adjacent. It's going to overflow it into adjacent cells in the Google Sheet. So this is the batch row, and we add this request information to batch row, so that later on here, we're going to write all the lead information to the Google Sheet. So that's going to write these 3 rows to the Google Sheet all in one go. And then it's also going to write this batch row, which we just defined, this Google Sheet here. And then we've just got some high level error handling in case something goes wrong before the for loop, or in case something goes wrong. So not in here, we've already got a try except for this. but this outer one is in case anything goes wrong here, essentially. So we've just got some more error handling for that. And then, yeah, same as before, we're going to log this fail row. This is actually going to go in the batches sheet again, as we show down here. So yeah, if there's any high level error, then we're going to log that to the batches sheet. And that's it basically. So this is, as I mentioned, the meat and potatoes. This is where all your custom logic lives to do the purpose-built function that the self-service flow step was designed to do. Now we get to the other kind of longer one to define, and that's the getServiceDefintion endpoint. And this kind of just, Marketo will query this endpoint so it gets information on what your service looks like, what information your service is expecting, and what information your service will send back. That's all defined in here. So you can see here, it's the API name of your self-service flow step. We give the trigger name the trigger name and the filter name of the, obviously, trigger and filter we want to be associated with the self-service flow step. We define the primary attribute. So in this case, the primary attribute for the GPT completion is this user field. And this primary attribute will always be present in the self-service flow step configuration. There's no way actually to not have a primary attribute field here, even if you don't use it. So come back here. And then the next, two most important things in the getServiceDefintion is your invocation payload definition. This is where you define what you want Marketo to send you. And then the other one is the callback payload definition, which is where you define what you're going to send to Marketo. So in the invocation payload definition, there are three things you need to be aware of. One are the flow attributes. One is the fields, and then it's this other parameter, user-driven mapping. So these flow attributes are the fields you want to be present in the configuration of the self-service flow step. So here you can see we're defining the user, the system prompt, the model we want to use, the field. This is the field we want to store the GPT response in, the number of output tokens we want to constrain the answer to be under, and the temperature. So these flow attributes, defining them here is how we get all of these fields to show up when we're configuring the self-service flow step in the flow of the Smart campaign. And then fields, these are the fields we want. These are the fields we want Marketo to send to the self-service flow step every time it is called. And then user-driven mapping, I'll explain in a bit more detail going back to my blog post, because it is a little bit hard to understand how this interacts with this fields parameter here. So I'll give you some examples in the blog post. As shown in the docs, it is possible to bring in global attributes as well as tokens for programs. There's my token, subscription, program member, trigger tokens, and campaign tokens. You can bring all of those in the invocation payload as well. And then the user-driven mapping, I'm going to go through two examples, one where it's set to false and one where it's set to true, obviously, the only two options available. But when this is set to false, all the fields you define in the fields parameter then appear in the map outgoing fields section when the admin is installing, and the admin must then activate all the fields he wants to be sent to your service in Replit, and they must also map them. They must also map the fields to the corresponding Marketo fields. So I'll just show you. This is another one I have where it's meant to be getting a quality score for a lead. It's scoring them based on demographic and firmographic information. So here in the fields parameter, so I'll just show you, we've got the flow attributes, we've got the fields. Here in the fields parameter, we're defining all fields we want Marketo to send to Replit every time the self-service flow step is called, because we want to score on all these fields. And then we've got user-driven mapping set equal to false. So then, since this is set equal to false, we see all these fields we defined in the map outgoing field section. And then in your code, when you want to retrieve these fields from the payload Marketo sends, you're going to use these external field names here. So the example I give is you're going to get the person job title. You're going to reference these fields and extract them from the Marketo request using these field names here. So to show you what that looks like in code, if we scroll back up here, all these names that I'm using here on the right-hand side, these are all the names as they are defined here in the getServiceDefintion. So this is how I will get them from the payload from Marketo, is using these names. Okay, so that's when it's set equal to false. When set equal to true, then no matter what you put in the fields parameter, it will be ignored. So there's no point filling out the fields parameter if user-driven mapping is set equal to true. When this is set equal to true, then the map outgoing fields still appears, but then the admin just has to manually add all the fields they want to be sent to Marketo every time the flow step is called. And as I mentioned here, when you want to reference these fields in your code, you're going to use the API name of the fields. So in this case, if we want to extract the phone number from the payload Marketo sends us, we're going to reference the API name of the field. So that's one key difference when user mapping is set from false to true. And one other thing worth mentioning here is if you set the user-driven mapping to false and your fields parameter is empty, then the map outgoing field section will be skipped. There's nothing in there, it'll just be empty. So that's the difference between these two. And I'll jump back into the code quickly to show you a bit of what the callback payload definition looks like, but it's set up very similarly. So in the callback payload definition, one thing to note right off the bat is you will get an error message if you try and define the primary attribute in here. There's no need to define it in the attributes of the callback payload definition, so don't worry about that. It will appear in the activity log regardless, so you don't need to define it here in order for it to appear in the activity log. It's going to be done automatically, so don't worry about defining the primary attribute here. Then we just define all the other fields we want to appear in the self-service flow step activity detail. We define them all here in the attributes section. As I mentioned before, if you don't define these fields down here, then even if you do define them up here in the activity data, they won't appear in the activity detail record. So that's why it's important to define them down here first. And then this fields parameter is the fields we want Marketo to update. So I'll show you another example from a different repository I have. But in the callback payload definition, I define these fields here. So I'm letting Marketo know I want you to update the quality score field and the quality score detail field. So that means when I'm forming the callback object here, and I specify the quality score and the quality score detail, Marketo is going to update them. So if I want Marketo to be able to update them here in the callback object, then I need to define those fields. I need to define those fields down here in the callback payload definition. And now I'll go back to the blog post to explain the difference between saying this equal to false and this equal to true. And this is the point I was making earlier about not declaring the primary attribute in the attributes parameter, so bear that in mind. Okay, so same as before, if we set it equal to false, then all those fields we define in the fields parameter will appear here in the map incoming field section, and the admin then has to activate all the fields they want Marketo to be able to override. essentially they're whitelisting all the fields Marketo should be able to overwrite. And then they're mapping the fields from your Replit code to the corresponding Marketo fields. And same as before, when you want to update these fields, you need to include them in the lead data section of the callback object. And when you're referencing them here, when user-driven mapping is set equal to false, you're going to reference these external field names here, the quality score and the quality score detail. You're going to reference the names that you define here. And then, similar to what I've already explained, when you set it equal to true, it doesn't matter if you have the fields parameter populated, it will ignore all the fields in there. And then instead, during installation, the admin has to install, they have to manually add all the fields they want, manually have to add all the fields they want the self-service flow step to be able to update. So they have to add them all here and activate them. And then, similar to before, if you want to update these fields, you have to include them in the callback object in the lead data section. But here you have to reference the field API name of the field in order to update it. Okay, so now we've gone through how things are structured. We can get to the more fun part of actually installing the repository, installing the self-service flow steps in Marketo and testing them out. So I'm going to guide you guys through that now. Okay, so I'm going to make this smaller if I can. I can't make my face smaller. One of the first things I'm going to do is just going to hit run here. And this will just cause the environment to update and install any packages that are needed and any libraries that are needed. So we're just going to hit, and it says missing required secrets. Click here to add them. Let's do that. Okay, that's fine. Don't worry about that. That always appears. That's good. And then we want to, we'll add the secrets in a second, but let's go set up deployment. You'll see how easy it is to deploy a service in Replit here. So I always go for the default. I don't change any of these. I just leave them as they is. I just leave them as they are. And go approve. And then one thing, I'm going to change this name here, we need to do is copy this primary domain, Marketo self-service flow step test. And then we need to go to all these Swagger functions, and we need to update that XXX there. We need to update it here. And we need to update it here. Okay. And then now we need to add our keys. So as I mentioned, and I showed you in the blog post, I'll just show you quickly again. To get your OpenAI and Telnex keys, you can follow the link here and here to get your API keys. So I'm going to copy those over from another repository that I have. So bear with me as I do that. Looks like I'm just going to paste these all in. And this Marketo user and password, this is the username and password we'll be prompted with when we install these self-service flow steps in Marketo later on. And whenever, I'll just show you this function here. So before requests, this function is called. If it's any of these functions, the install, the service icon, or the brand icon, it doesn't request authentication. But if it's one of these paths, like the status path or the submit async path, then it does request authentication. And all it does is it just takes the provided username and password that Marketo sent over, and it checks them against the username and password stored in the secrets here to make sure they match. Okay, and before we hit deploy here, there's a few other changes I'm going to walk you through. And one of the things I'm going to do actually, because I want to show you what it looks like if you want to add your own self-service flow step in here. So I'm actually going to delete this calculate formula and just deploy these two for now. And then later on in the video, I'm going to show you if you were given this repository and you want to add a new self-service flow step, how you can do that. So I'm going to delete this so we can go through that exercise later. Okay, so I'll show you what needs to be updated in these files before we deploy. One of them is I'm going to need to update, because I want to show you the logging and how that works and show you that these things are working properly. I'm going to update the inbound footing JSON. This is currently just a dummy file. I've redacted all the key information, but I'm going to update this with the real stuff so it actually works. And I'm going to update all these Routes.py with the correct sheet ID. Where is that? Over here. So I'm going to put the spreadsheet ID in. So just in case you figure this out for yourself and you want to follow along, we're going to copy this spreadsheet ID in and put this here. And then we're going to do the same here. If you guys don't want the Google Sheet logging in your scripts and it's too much of a pain and you're getting errors when trying to run this, then you can just paste this code into an AI chatbot like ChatGPT and ask it to remove the Google Sheet logging for you and keep everything else the same. Even if the Google Sheet logging doesn't work, there are try and accept statements to handle if the Google Sheet logging fails. So the worst that would happen is it would just print an error message if the Google Sheet logging failed, but everything else should still work and the lead should still be updated in Marketo. So now we're ready. Once we've added our secrets, we've just made the changes for our Google Sheets logging. That's all we need to do to hit deploy. And while this is deploying, I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to first jump over to the admin section here to show you how to install them. So we'll only be able to install them once this finishes. So I'll pause the video and then I'll walk you through installing these two self-service flow steps, testing them, and then checking them out in the log here. I'm actually monitoring the deploy here and I have a feeling it's going to fail because I deleted the calculate formula function here. So I just need to delete it from here as well because it's trying to reference it and it obviously doesn't exist. You won't need to do this in yours, obviously, because you'd have all three of these right off the bat. You'd add your secrets, you'd add the Google Sheet logging, and then you'd hit deploy. You'd either add the Google Sheet logging or remove the Google Sheet logging, then hit deploy. So you wouldn't need to do this change I'm about to make. So I'm just making this because I've deleted that service for the sake of an exercise later on. And I'm going to get an error message here, and then I'm going to have to redeploy, so bear with me. So here's the error message. So I'm just going to redeploy because I know what it was about. And then hopefully it should work this time with no issues. I need to delete this line as well, of course. So now we're good to go and redeploy. Well, this is still loading. I can tell this is the URL I need. Let me just open that up quickly. So I'm going to copy this and bring it into Marketo. Then I'm going to go / and then the first one we're going to install and test is the OpenAI one. So the path we need is this GPT completion. So just copy this. This is the base. It's going to be, whoops, / GPT completion. And then as I mentioned before, since we want to install, we're going to do / install. And then once it's finished deploying here, we're going to hit next, and then we should be able to install it. Okay, there we go. It was a successful deploy here. So you can see how easy it is to deploy in Replit, like add the secrets, deploy. And then I didn't mention this before, but this is how you actually reference those secrets. This is how you reference those secrets in your code. You go os.getEnvironment Marketo user. So it pulls these from the secrets. And the same in OpenAI, it pulls the OpenAI key like that. And then it pulls the Telnex API key like this. So let's go back to the admin. This should work. Woohoo. Actually, I think I know. So this error here, I think might be because this isn't actually a comment in JSON like in Python. So I'm just going to remove that. I'm going to remove it here. I then have to redeploy, so that'll take another few minutes of doing everything live. And that was it. Such a simple thing. Those little hashtags right here cause that vague error in Marketo. But once I removed those hashtags, redeployed, all worked fine. So onwards and upwards. I installed those. Why the secrets now disappeared? So if you ever want to find the secrets for your code, you click on the 4 square boxes down here, and then you can also find other useful things, like if you want to sync this whole project to GitHub, if you want to do stuff in the shell, like install new libraries, or I don't know, run some other Python code. And then if you want to access your secrets, it's here. For some reason, all the secrets I put in earlier on just aren't here anymore. So once you're in here, just copy them all in. Once they're in, you can deploy, and then they should take effect. So I'm going to add all these secrets. Maybe I just forgot to save when I added them first time, but now all my secrets are in. And in deployments, if you go to settings, is it settings? Overview. Should be able to see the secrets for deployment somewhere as well. Okay, I can't find those at the moment, but basically all the secrets are in and now deploying. And once they're deployed, I'll show you how to basically, let's go here. I'll get this ready so long while that's deploying. So we're going to copy the username and the password. Just going to copy that in. It'll probably display here. So I just put as marketing ops and the password. Paste that in as well. That stays hidden, which is nice. And then when this is finished deploying, I'm going to go finish and go to the next step. Okay, that's done. So let's go next. So this is one of the annoying things about the self-service flow steps. So it's document, the one I was talking about, all the bugs, the known bugs. One of the known bugs, and I reference it here, when you're importing, old names seem to stay in the system. So here you'll notice I've got, there is no GPT completion, if you can see in the background here. However, there's a name collision. So if I try and go next, it won't let me because the name GPT completion is already taken. This was when I previously installed it for testing. And I actually went through, I don't know, loads of different iterations. So like even if I try GPT-1, I had a GPT-1 in the past when I was testing and then deleted it. This will bring up a collision as well. So those old names stay in the system for some reason. So you always have to increment them or make new names. So I'm just going to call this demo because I haven't had a demo in the past. And then go next. And then I have to map the fields that I want the self-service flow step to be able to modify. So just to show you why this is the case, so we're GPT completion. We've got the invocation payload. We've got the user dripping. Which one is this? Oh, sorry, no. Where this is map the incoming fields we're looking at. So since we're mapping the incoming fields, we're down here in the callback payload definition. So we didn't specify this self-service flow step doesn't need Marketo to send it any lead fields because we're going to get them all from the flow step context. So that's why this is empty. And we're going to get all the information from the flow attributes. So it doesn't matter what user-driven mapping is here, but for the callback payload definition, we've got the user-driven mapping set equal to true. So when I come here in admin, I have to add all the fields that I want Marketo. I have to add all the fields that I want self-service flow step to be able to modify. So the one I'm going to do here is account notes. That's the only one I'm going to add for purposes of testing, but you can add more over here. Then I'm going to go next and then save. And then we'll see the self-service flow step appear here. I'm just going to add the other one, and this will be much quicker than before. So I'm just going to copy this. Well, I'll show you how to get it from the start. So we go to deployments, settings, and it's this domain. I'm going to go back to Marketo. There needs to be like a HTTPS at the start. And then we're going to go /, and then this time it's going to be send SMS. That's the path we want to query. And then we're going to go install. And then it's going to be the same password and stuff as before. So we can just go to our secrets and pull those in. So we're going to copy the username. We're going to copy the password. And then same as before, I have to resolve the collision because I've got so many of these from testing in the past. You won't have to do this. It should work for you the first time. But if you do install it a second time, have to reinstall it, you'll have to do the same thing. Okay, and the telnext SMS, it doesn't request any fields from Marketo except for the flow attributes. And it's not going to write to any fields, so we don't need to map any incoming fields either. So we don't need to map any outgoing fields or map any incoming fields here. So we just go save, and let's test these out now. So in this smart list or these smart campaigns, I just have email addresses Tyron at the Workflow Pro. Then I'm going to refresh. Let's see if it pulls it in SMS. Yeah, it's pulling in all the old ones I have from the past because I deleted them, but I didn't refresh the smart campaign after deleting all those old ones. So that'll give you an idea of how much testing I've done. So let's pull in SMS, send SMS demo. That's the one we just created. And then I'm going to paste in all the parameters for this. So lead form phone. This is the phone number from my telnext account. And again, you're going to have to follow these steps to get an SMS capable phone number and set it up properly. And then the message, I just want to say hello lead first name. And while I'm here, I'll show you another error or another bug with self-service flow steps. Nothing appears here. There's no hint text here. So let's look at change data value, for example. If I pull in, let's say, just pull in SLA assigned to. If I do this here, you see we get different suggestions for lead, company, and if I start typing like first name, this appears. So this is broken for self-service flow steps. This same option doesn't appear, which is unfortunate. So I mentioned that it's the very first thing I mentioned here, the token picker is not appearing. And it's a bit deceiving because, whoops, here we are. It's a drop down, but it's not actually a drop down field. It's just like an open text field. So this drop down is a bit deceiving. So that's like one of the bugs that I've listed in that document there. If you do want to get tokens, I recommend pulling in the change data value flow step like I've done here, and then typing out the name of the token you want. So we want form phone here. Need form phone. Why is that search so bad? So this is what we want. So once you've gotten it here, then you can push it in here, and you can do the exact same for this. So I'm going to schedule this to run. So we'll currently see that this logging sheet is empty, but once I run, let's go run once, run now. That should populate, and then while we're waiting for that, I'm just going to do the GPT one real quick. So same as before, a smart list email address, I'm going to use tyrontelnext.com here, and then this is going to be the GPT completion demo. And then same way as before, I have these in documents, so that's where I'm pasting them in from, but you can paste these in from the change data value flow step like I just showed you. We want it to be GPT-4o as the model. We want the system prompt just to be, we want to summarize these AE-SDR notes in less than 255 characters. We want to store it in the account notes field, and we're giving the API name of the field here. And then we want to constrain the output tokens to, let's say, 100 output tokens. One token is roughly 4 characters, so 255 characters would be, divide that by 4, like 60 tokens. So I'm giving 100 tokens is more than enough, and the temperature is 0.5. Then we're going to schedule, and then we're going to run once, run now, run. So while this is running, I'm going to check the sheet here. So we can see this is the payload response that came back from the Telnex SMS API to say it sent the text message. And one thing to do with this sheet is just to resize all the rows. Okay, so now we can see the timestamp that this ran. We've got a lead link to the person in Marketo. We've got the from phone number, the to phone number, the message, and the Telnex SMS response. And then we've got all the batch information here. So this was the callback, nothing in there. We don't need to update any of the lead information. So that's why the callback was so simple. And that's why there's no callback response here for this lead. And then in the request here, you can see the lead information, the ID, the to phone number, the from phone number, and the message in the batch. So this worked correctly. Let's jump over to the GPT completion leads. That's also run successfully now, which is nice. We've got the exact same as before. We've got the person link. We've got the system prompt. We've got the user prompt. So in this case, this is the AE-SDR notes, which is quite long. And then we asked ChatGPT to summarize it for us in less than 255 characters, which it did. These are all the other inputs. This ChatGPT output, and we're storing it in this field. There was no error, so that's empty. And then this is what the callback object looks like for this lead, because we want to update the account notes field with this value. So this is what the callback object looks like. We've got the ID, and then we say update the account notes field with this value. And then we've got the batch info here. So the callback response, again, is pretty simple. And then this is the request that Marketo sent with all the lead information and all the flow step context. So this is what Marketo sent to us. Okay, so both of those ran successfully. And then if we want to view the activity detail for this person, we can click on that link. It's taking a while to load. Okay, so I'll show what the activity detail looks like for this. So we sent the SMS. So you can see we've got the from phone number specified. This is the primary attribute. You can see that the token doesn't resolve here, which is annoying. And that's another bug I mentioned here, that the primary attribute token doesn't resolve. So when you look at it in the activity log here, you'll see it doesn't resolve. And when you click in here, it doesn't resolve either. So that's actually just another bug of self-service flow steps that doesn't resolve. But I've actually stored, because of this, like the to phone doesn't resolve, I've actually created another thing called the to phone value, where I actually pull in the number. Then I've got the message that was sent and the Telnex SMS response. So to show you what this looks like in code, this activity detail corresponds to these fields. These are the ones we're storing in. So yeah, the fields we define here in activity data are what show up in the activity detail. And you'll notice here that I don't specify the to phone. That's because it's a primary attribute, and the primary attribute will always appear in the activity detail. You don't need to define it here in order for it to appear. And one annoying thing is it's not possible to it's not so bad here, but it's not possible to order like all the Marketo default fields. It would be nice to have those all up the top and then all the self-service flow step fields down the bottom, but it's not possible to do that. It's not possible. I listed here. You can't define the order of the activity details. So you'll get default Marketo fields interspersed with the self-service flow step fields, like the step ID here, and then you've got source, which is another default Marketo field, and they're just interspersed with all the custom self-service flow step fields, which is annoying, and you can't change that order. So that's another thing to be aware of. Okay, so we let's look at this one. We can see it ran here. Again, we can see the native Marketo fields like person ID, success, and source interspersed with all the self-service flow step fields. And as I showed you before, the token doesn't resolve. So if you do want to see what the user inputted here, I've made this change, but I haven't reinstalled the self-service flow step, so it's not taking effect yet. You need to define your own user prompt and pull in the value. And then once you've defined this here, activity data, you have to define it down here as well. So once you define this new user prompt, then it will appear in here. So this is the primary attribute, and the token doesn't resolve, but then once we've made this change, user prompt will then also appear in here, and it will have the actual prompt that the person put in the self-service flow step configuration. The only reason it's not showing up here is that I'd have to uninstall the self-service flow step and then reinstall it to get that change to take effect. But we can see that this worked, and then it changed the account notes field from null. You can see I was doing some testing earlier on, so ignore those. But we can see it changed the account notes field from null to this value. And the source was our demo, our self-service flow step. So change it from null to this new value. And we can just look in the sheet here. This is what the system sent. This was the system prompt, user prompt, all the input information. This was GPT's response. There's no error. And then this is the callback object because we want to update the account notes field with this new value from ChatGPT. So that's included. And we also include all the stuff we want to put in the activity detail. That's also included here. We can see you've got the model, the temperature, the output tokens, etc. So all this stuff is what appears in the activity detail. And then the lead data is how we update the account notes field on the lead. And we can look at the batch, and we can see all the input information sent from Marketo in the batch, as well as all the callback information at the top here. Okay, so now we've tested our two self-service flow steps. I want to show you now how you can create your own self-service flow step in the existing template. And just before I do that, I just want to show you where to get the API name for a field. So if you go to field management, you search for the field, this is the API name you're going to put in the configuration of the self-service flow step here. And we'll do the same for the calculate formula field, the calculate formula self-service flow step that we're going to work on now. First thing we're going to do is create a new folder in services. We're going to add folder. We're going to call it calc formula. Then we're going to duplicate. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, the best one to duplicate the most similar self-service flow step to the one we want to build is the calculate formula. Sorry, not making sense. The most similar self-service flow step to this calculate. So we want to build calculate formula, and the most similar one to it is actually this GPT completion, because the GPT completion lists the field that we want to put the answer in. And we want to do something similar here where we want to specify the API name of the field we want to put the answer in. So this is the most similar one. Here you can see we don't actually do any updating to the lead. So I'm not going to clone this one. I'm going to clone this one because it's the most similar to what we're looking for here for the calculate formula self-service flow step. So I'm going to clone this. Let's just duplicate it. Routes copy, move it into that folder. Let's duplicate the file. And then just going to duplicate this last one. And then just drag it in. Okay. So I'm going to rename this to just be formula functions.py. .py, and that take effect. Rename. Okay, that took effect. And then I'm just going to paste in the code. This will be whatever custom logic you want it to be, but I'm just going to paste in the custom logic I want here. Okay. And then let's go into the Routes.py. We want this base. We're going to have to update this base. Well, first of all, let's start at the very top. We want to update. We want to pull in this formula functions. We want to reference that in this script. So we have to change this to be formula functions. Then we change this base to be calculate formula. That's already done. And in my template here, I've already created a calc formula leads, calculate formula batches. So this is going to automatic. We don't need to make any modifications here basically. And I'm just going to show you this modification that needs to be made. We should also, no, I won't go through that on this video. It's not that important. Okay, so those changes are made. Everything else can stay the same here. Service icon, brand icon. This can stay the same. This can stay the same, the lead ID. And then all we need to do is modify the information we're getting from the flow step context here. Oh, let me zoom back in. Make this bigger. So we want to get, so I'm just going based off of this. We know we want to get a formula value. We know we want to get the data type, and we know we want to get the response field. So before doing this, I think it'll make more sense for you guys to do it in the getServiceDefinition first. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's jump down here. So this is going to be calculate formula. Calc formula. Let's call it calculate formula. Say, so you can fast forward here while I'm kind of just filling out all this manual stuff. Okay, the primary attribute this time is going to be the formula field. And then the flow attributes we want are going to be the response data type and the response field. So the flow attributes are going to be formula, it's going to be a text, and it's going to be an open text field containing the formula we want to calculate. The name, we're going to call it formula. So you can see this capital F formula is what will appear here. Then we want data underscore type for the data type that we want the answer to be in. Data type is going to be a string. And the name we're going to call response data type. Oh, sorry, put that in the wrong place. That should be here, response data type. And then since we want this to be a picked list, we need to add two special lines, which I'm going to add here. So has picked list is true and enforce picked list select is true. This prevents the user from manually typing in a value. This means they have to select one of the picked list values. So we put that in there. And then we specify the field that we want the answer to be put in. Field to store the result. Oops. And we're going to call this response field. So you'll notice that response field and response data type, this is what we see here and here. This is what the labels are. And then we can delete all these other fields. User-driven mapping will leave as false because it doesn't matter. We don't have any fields that we're requesting in the object context. We're not requesting fields besides the stuff we're requesting from the flow attributes. So that can stay false. And then we need to, so we don't need to put the primary attribute in here, as I've already mentioned, but we need to put all the other ones in so they appear in the activity detail. So the data type that we want the answer to be in, it's a string. Put the same thing here, output data type. Then we've got the field that we want to store the value in. It's going to be a string. Response field is what we're going to call it. Okay. Then we've got the answer of our formula. This can be a text field because you might want to do some text manipulation and it could be very long. So we want text rather than string here. There's going to be formula result. Formula result. We can call this the same thing. Formula result. And then in case we get any errors that we want to log to the activity detail, we're just going to say formula error in case there's an error computing the formula. Data type is text because it could be quite long, so string won't do. Okay, and then we can delete the rest of these. We don't need them. Okay, and then user-driven mapping is true because we want the admin to specify all the fields that this self-service flow step will be able to write to. So we're not going to specify them here. We're going to leave the admin whitelist all the fields that this self-service flow step should write to. So we're going to leave that as true. So now we've defined these here. It's these API names that we're going to use above when we're retrieving information from the Marketo request and when we are writing information back to Marketo in a callback object. So hopefully this will make a bit more sense now. So let's jump back up here. So formula, we want to get formula. So the only thing we need to get from the object context is the lead ID. So we don't need to change that. But then we want to get formula from the flow step context. So CTX, we're referencing that here. We're getting formula. And then the default is just an empty string. We're getting data type. Data underscore type. And the default we're going to give this is string. So that means if it's not given to us by Marketo, we're going to assume that string is the data type we should return the answer as. And then the response field. It's just called field. Oops. And we can also just give it an empty string like that. So we don't need the rest of these. So we're getting all the information we need from the input payload. And then we need to change this. So the answer this time, we're not going to call ChatGPT. We're going to call our new. So it's going to be formula functions dot not get completion. Formula functions dot, what do we call it? Compute formula. So that corresponds to this function here that we're calling compute formula. And then we see we need to give it the formula we want to evaluate, the output type. So the formula we want to evaluate, we're going to pull in from here. Formula. And then the output type is going to be data type. So then we're going to log that answer. We're going to write it back to the response field that we pulled in here. So that's going to be this field. So if we put in total score here, it's going to write it back to total score here. It's going to pull that in and write the answer back there. Then we've got, we need to change this. So this should be like the formula. We actually don't need to specify this here because the formula is the primary attribute. The formula is the primary attribute, so we don't actually need to include it here. But to prevent the issue I mentioned to you before where the primary attribute doesn't resolve the tokens, I'm going to call this formula value. And I'm going to put formula in here. So I'll show you, if you don't already know what I mean, I'll show you later on when we see the activity detail. Data type, data underscore type. I'm going to pull in data type then. Data underscore type. The field we want to write to. That's going to be, I can just take this existing one. Field is going to be the response field. It's going to call this answer. And success is true. So formula value, since I want this to appear in the activity detail, I need to make sure I've defined this down here in the attributes of my callback payload definition. So I haven't done that, so I'm going to do that now. So I'm just going to copy, is there text? This is already a text and I'm looking for another text. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to say, call this one formula value. let's call it formula value. Keep it simple. Don't need to overthink this. Formula value. So now I've defined it here. When I specify it up here, it should appear in the activity log. Okay, so we've got the formula value, data type, the field, the answer, success. If there's any error, we want to reference the formula error. And let's just make sure I have this correct. Formula underscore error. Let's make sure it matches this. Okay, that's hyphen, so let's change that to underscore. Okay. That's good. Then we just need to modify this. So this is how I get the hyperlinked lead ID. You'll need to update this to be your Marketo URL if you want the hyperlinks in the Google Sheet to work. So you'll need to update this base and then just substitute. The lead ID will always be substituted in, but you guys just need to update this for your own instance. And then I'm going to have to do all of this again. So we're going to log formula. This is all the information we're going to log to the Google Sheet for this lead. Then it's going to be data type. Then it's going to be response field. We're just going to call, yeah, we already have it, so I'll just take that from down there. And then it's going to be answer. Answer, error, error. Yeah, that's all fine. Then we don't need to change any of this. Yeah, then everything down here stays the exact same. Now that we've defined, let's just rename this to just be Routes.py. Damn it. Routes.py. Okay, and I'm going to rename this just to be swagger.json. I'll show you the things you need to update in here as well. So this needs to be changed. We're going to call this calculate formula. Whoops, calculate formula. You can change these version numbers as you make more additions. So you can increment this every time you make a change and publish. I just want to copy in stuff here to make it quicker as we're going along. Calculates an Excel formula. Calculates an Excel formula. You can change this to your company's domain, and you can change this to the email of someone at your company. You'll need to modify this with your Replit primary domain, and then this we need to change to be the same as this, which is calc formula. Okay, let's scroll through. Let's just rename this to be calc formula action. Calculate formula action. That can all stay the same. Can all stay the same. Yeah, most of this you don't need to modify, and the modifications we do need to make are quite small. So here, this is going to be the API name of our service, which is calc-formula. Whoops. The primary attribute, as I said, is formula. And just calculate formula again. I just want to paste that in to save time. Calculates an Excel formula. Okay, and then the only other change we need to make now is just to import it. So it's going to be from services dot, it's going to be the name of our folder, which is calc formula dot routes, and then it's going to be import the blueprint as, let's call it calc BP. Okay, take its suggestion. Why is it not appearing? Okay, and then we're going to register. And the auto suggestions with the AI that Replit have are really nice. So those are all the changes we need to make, and I'm going to hit deploy now. Just hit run here, just in case there are any new packages that need to be installed. So I'll see what it says. It's updating the environment. So once it's updated the environment and installed any packages it needs to install, okay, that's good. Now I can hit redeploy. So that's finished deploying. Where's my face gone? So same as before, let's click this here just to get the starting URL that we need to install in Marketo. Let's go back to service providers, a new service. And then this time it's going to be / calculate formula / install. We copy in the password the same way we did before. So I know them off by heart, but just in case, you can copy them from here. So I'm going to copy that, paste it in, go next. I have to resolve the collision, same as before, because I've had so many test variations of this in the past that are still in the system, even though I've deleted them. And then we have to map the incoming fields that we want this self-service flow step to be able to modify. So in this case, I just wanted to be able to modify a thing called total score. Let's save. Let's test this one out. So if I go formula, okay, let me refresh to pull it in. Okay. And I'm just going to copy and paste this stuff in to make it quicker. But as I showed you before, you can pull in lead tokens by bringing in a change data value step underneath, and then choosing any field and then pulling in the tokens when you're setting the value of that field, and then copy those tokens in here. I showed that earlier on in this video, so scroll back if you want to see that. And then total score. Well, let me just get it, the API name from here, just to try to get that. We're going to go total score and copy this API name. And actually, one thing I forgot to do, and that's why this won't work, is I forgot to include in the Routes.py here. The one thing I didn't include was the getServiceDefintion endpoint, or sorry, the getPicklist endpoint. So I'll just copy that in to save us time. So I'm just going to paste this down here. So I've now added this getPicklist endpoint. So whenever someone clicks the drop down here, Marketo is going to query this getPicklist endpoint, and it's going to provide the name of the field, which in this case, it's going to be data underscore type. It's going to be the API name of the field as we define it in code. So when Marketo, it sends the name of the field for which it's looking for picklist values. We extract that. And then if field name is data underscore type, we want to return these values in string, bool, or float. And if we had other picklist fields in here, then we just include those field names here as other options and return the choices for those fields. So now that I've got this in here, the getPicklist endpoint, when I redeploy, and I'll actually have to reinstall. That's an annoying thing. There is no way to refresh your self-service flow step. You have to delete it and then install it again. That's another bug I've mentioned here where there's no refresh option. You have to reinstall it every time. So that's unfortunate. So I'm going to redeploy. And then I'll just show you that this doesn't work even though I've redeployed, and then I'll delete it and reinstall the new one to show you it has taken effect. So let me start the redeploy process. And actually I'll show you side by side. It might be to see, but this has to deploy first. So let me copy this URL, go back to Marketo service providers. Let's install a new one. Calc formula / okay, enter these. Call it demo fixed. Okay, so if I go back here and I refresh, I go formula. So we'll just copy this in. Where's my face? Just copy that in, copy this in. And then this one, whoops. We see we get our different pick list values. Whereas this one from earlier doesn't have them. It doesn't update or refresh, unfortunately. So I'm just going to have to delete that old one and remove it from the instance. But this one should work now. So when I run this, so basically just showing you what it's doing. We're adding the email demo score to the title demo score. We want the output value to be a float, and we want to store in this total score field. And just while that's computing, I'll show you what the formula. Wow, a lot of formula things. Oh yeah, formula is calculated. So this is what the triggers look like for this. And this is what the filters look like. And you can also use the constraints like the response data type, the response field, formula result, formula value, formula error. You can use all of these as constraints, and you can pull in all of those as constraints on the triggers too. So that's what these look like. I'm just going to delete those here. And you'll notice that formula is a primary attribute. Okay. And if we check this, calculate formula leads and batches. Okay, so if we go and check our logging sheet, same as before, we can see the hyperlinked lead. We can see the formula. We can see the actual resolved values of the tokens here. It was 5 plus 3, and we can see the answer is 8.0 because we said we wanted the response data format to be a float, and we want to store in the total score field. We've got the callback object here, which shows that we want to update the total score field with this value on this lead. And this is all the stuff we want to put in the this is all the stuff we want to put in the detail record on the person when we view the activity log. And then I'll just show you what the batch looks like quickly. This is what we received from Marketo, all the callback information. We got all the lead information here. You can see the formula we want to compute, the data type and the field. And then we get the successful callback response to Marketo. And then let's open this person up and see what the activity detail record looks like. So we can see that the total score changed from 0 to 8. And it will have been changed by the self-service flow step. And same as before, the primary attribute value, if we put any tokens in here, they don't resolve. And same here, the primary attribute value is present, but the tokens don't resolve. So that's why I created this formula value, which actually shows you what values the tokens have. That's what I was doing up here, if you remember from earlier on. This formula value, defining it here, and then defining it down here so that we can actually see what the token values are. Yeah, and this worked as expected, which is great. So that's how, and I know it's taken a while to get here, but that's how you can install the Replit repository right off the bat, enter your secret API keys, and then if you want to implement your own Google Sheet logging, then you have to make those changes, or you can strip that out completely. But once you've handled the Google Sheets logging and you've entered your API keys, you can just deploy the cloned Replit repository and then install the self-service flow steps, and they should work right off the bat. And then I've just shown you here in the past 30 minutes how you can add a new self-service flow step by cloning one of the existing ones in the repository and just making some modifications so that it works the way you want it to. And I'm just going to go through, as I mentioned, some of the quirks. I've mentioned a lot of these already, but you don't get auto suggestions for the self-service flow step fields like you do for other flow step actions. The token on the primary attribute doesn't actually resolve. We can see that here in the activity detail too. When you're importing, old names, API names, trigger names, filter names stay in the system even if you've deleted the self-service flow step. If you make changes, there's no way to refresh. If you make changes to like the getServiceDefinition, or you make changes to the Routes.py to add the getPicklist endpoint like I did, there's no refresh option to get Marketo to see that. You have to uninstall and then reinstall it, which is quite annoying. There's no option to leave the primary attribute empty. So even for this quality score one, I didn't actually need any flow step context, but this primary attribute field appeared anyway. So I just had to say, like, put in dummy text and just say test. So it didn't actually matter. I didn't use this value in my self-service flow step code at all. As I mentioned before, you can't define the order of all these attributes in the activity details. It would be nice if you did, and it would be nice if you could separate them from the native Marketo activity detail fields. Josh has recorded some issues here as well. I won't read through these here, but you can check them out in your own time and read through them. Yeah, so you can take a look through these other errors yourself. And then Josh's also got his wish list here, which you can check out too. So there we have it. It's what, about 2 hours of a video, and although it's been long for you, imagine how long it's been for me talking this entire time and also fixing all these errors on the fly. So I hope you've appreciated the video. If you have, leave some love in the comments, give the video a like, share it with people in your network if they think it would be useful. That always helps me out. And if you're looking on steps for where to go from here, as I mentioned, if you're new to APIs and Python programming, this is probably very intimidating for you. So maybe once you know now how valuable self-service flow steps can be, and you now have a use case for APIs in Python, then you should check out the Demystify the API crash course and pre-register for the Python for RevOps crash course. But if you're already kind of familiar with programming APIs, then take a look at the Marketo API Quick Start Guide and the Bulk API Quick Start Guide to learn more about the Marketo API and get very cool use cases on how you can use these APIs to streamline and automate a lot of different revenue operations processes. And then finally, there's just some self-service flow step FAQs that you can read about here in your own time. They do behave similarly to executable campaigns in that the flow of a smart campaign will wait for the self-service flow step to complete before continuing down to the subsequent actions in the flow. If you use the self-service flow step in a trigger campaign, it'll send one lead in a batch. But if you use the self-service flow step in a batch campaign, it can send up to 1,000 leads in a single batch to your service. And then they can be used in trigger, batch, and executable campaigns. So that's everything on self-service flow steps. As I mentioned, if you liked the video, share some love. If you have any questions, leave them in comments, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future. The next videos I'm going to make and the next blog posts I'm going to make are how to create a fine-tuned OpenAI model so you can train it on your custom data and use it for revenue operations use cases like spam form fill classification, persona matching based on job title, and how you can also, if you've got an open text field, how you can give that open text field and get it classified and bucketed according to your preferences. So I'll walk through those 3 use cases for fine-tuned OpenAI models and how you can use those in Marketo. And then the other blog post I want to work on after that is how to use the batch API provided by OpenAI. So if you're doing bulk jobs, instead of calling the chat endpoint in like a for loop, you can just upload a file of all the chat interactions you'd like to have for each lead. You can upload them in bulk to the OpenAI batch API, and it'll execute them over a course of 24 hours. And the advantage is it's 50% cheaper than it's 50% cheaper than using the chat completion on its own, making a request every time. The batch API is a lot more effective. So if you're doing bulk jobs that involve using the completion endpoint, then you should consider using the batch API, and that'll also be another future post of mine. So stay tuned and subscribe if you want to see that sort of content coming your way.